Excellent. Well, I don't know quite how I follow that. Thank you. That was fantastic. So, who here likes the story of Jonah? Me, I like it. Yeah, it's a good story, isn't it? How can you not like a story that has a massive fish that swallows somebody whole? Yeah, but I think the fish can be a little bit of a distraction. It steals our attention and it makes us think that this story is about the fish. And it's not about the fish at all. It's about God. God should be the focus of the story. So, one of the main characters is Jonah. We call Jonah a minor prophet, but in actual fact, in his day, he was somebody who was really well known and respected. He lived in a time when Israel was really prosperous and doing well, and the people thought that the wealth and the happiness and the security they had were a sign of God's blessing on the people. But in the Assyria, east, of course, east, in the east. Assyria and its capital city, Nineveh, were growing strong and they were becoming rivals to Israel. Amongst this, God speaks out to Jonah and he calls him and he urges him to go to Nineveh. And he tells him that when he's there, he needs to preach to the people in Nineveh and correct them in their ways. But instead of listening to God and doing what he's told, Jonah does exactly the opposite. He turns and he goes to Tarshish, which is in exactly the opposite direction. Now, usually in stories, the hero or the heroine is somebody who does something pretty special. And by doing this great thing, this wonderful thing, they initiate a change that leads to a better way of life and something pretty special happening. But I quite like Jonah because he's actually very ordinary and I can relate to what he does. He gets lots of things wrong and he definitely doesn't listen to God when he should do. The place that he wants to go to, Tarshish, is described in the Bible as a place where Solomon's fleet of ships went, and they collected gold and silver and ivory, monkeys, peacocks. So we can imagine that it was somewhere that was pretty exotic, and it would have been quite exciting to go there. I can imagine that Jonah would have been excited about this big adventure that he was going on. So I can imagine that he was a little bit put out when God said that the plan is not for Jonah to go to Tarshish where he can see the monkeys and the peacocks. Instead, he's going to Nineveh, a place that is much less glamorous, much less exciting. And not only that, it's somewhere that's quite dangerous. It's on the brink of war. So on the ship, on the journey to Tarshish, the ship that Jonah is sailing on comes across a fierce and mighty storm. The sailors steering the ship are terrified. And in their darkest moments, when they're really fearful for their life, they pray to God in desperation, asking for protection, for deliverance from the storm. And where's Jonah when this happens? Is he there, do you think, praying with all the sailors? No, he's asleep. He goes to sleep. Can you imagine? The ship's like this, and Jonah's there snoring. Well, the ship's captain does everything that he possibly can do to reach the shore, but the situation becomes impossible, and Jonah is thrown overboard with great reluctance from the crew. But they know that God is there. He's at the heart of what's happening, and they trust in his power. Stranded in the middle of the sea, Jonah is swallowed by this massive fish. And there, inside the heart of the fish's belly, he finally starts to pray and to listen to what God is saying. Now, we're told, God is always there. He listens to us when we pray. But sometimes, quite a lot of the time, I forget that prayer is about building a relationship with God. And I think it's almost like a shopping list. I go to God and I tell him the things that I'm worried about, the things that I'm concerned about, the things that I'd like God to change for me. I'm sure you can imagine what I'm talking about. Please, God, can you help me to achieve world peace? Can we feed the hungry and heal the sick? Can we solve the climate crisis? Just little things for us today. I'm not asking for much. But the thing about prayer is that God doesn't always answer us in the way that we expect or even want sometimes. Sometimes we don't receive an answer at all, and that can be really, really frustrating. Somehow, Jonah manages to God releases Jonah from the belly of the whale, and back on dry land, he experiences a complete transformation and a new way of thinking. He travels to Nineveh just like God told him to, even though he knows that it risks violence and war. And when he arrives, he preaches a really simple message. That means he speaks to the people and he tells them, if you don't change your ways, if you don't start being kind and caring to people, if you don't start listening to God, Nineveh's going to be destroyed in 40 days. You might think that the people of Nineveh would have just looked at Jonah and laughed at him. But surprisingly, they listened to what he's got to say. And they actually obey his word. It's quite a difference to the reluctance and to the resistance that Jonah has demonstrated to God. Now, Jonah thought that he was a man with all the answers. He thought that he knew best and that he was in control. We might remember the fish in this story. When we think about Jonah, I'm sure that will always be the first thing that comes to our minds. But when we do so, we should acknowledge that our God is one of truth and trust and hope. He's a God who forgives and redeems. Ultimately, the people of Nineveh didn't need Jonah to tell them how to meet God. Neither did the sailors that he met on the ship. The story tells us that God moves in our hearts. When we believe and act in faith, God meets us where we are and he responds. In the people of Nineveh, we see that they have a change of heart. They do change their ways. They do listen to God and follow his ways. And that in doing so, God changes his mind. And we're all given hope and a new way of life. Amen.